Okay, hello. My name is Sam Hunt and I'm the Programme Director for Festival UK 2022. And thanks to UK House and the Arts Council England and British Underground for giving us this opportunity to tell you a bit more about the project. In the next 55 minutes or so, I want to tell you about what Festival UK 2022 actually is, and I suppose critically what it is not. The role we think it will play in terms of meeting the demands of today and the opportunities contained within it for preparing us to meet or help meet some of the demands for our tomorrows. And then we're going to have a bit of a discussion about the journey the project has been on to date, with a particular focus on the ambitious approach to research and development, a process designed to produce 10 examples of cross-sector creative ambition intended to reach millions, with some of the key individuals who helped shape that process. Those 10 teams are now selected and will be announcing the creative minds behind those projects next week. These are 10 of 30 cross-sector creative teams who have just been through an intensive 3-month directed phase of research and development, which involved around 500 individuals drawn from across the UK and the worlds of science, tech, engineering, arts, maths, and all of the places in between. As mentioned, some of the key individuals involved in the design and delivery of this R&D phase are with me here, and we'll discuss it in detail. But first, I wanted to give you a bit of a story so far, an overview of what Festival UK 2022 is and what we hope it's going to achieve. The premise of UK Festival 2022 is simple. It's a festival of creativity. Why now? Why creativity? Because the future is creative, and now more than ever, we need to support our creatives and creative industries. The 10 experiments in creativity that will make up the public programme are not capital investment. They are not the creation of new buildings. This is not bricks and mortar. This is an investment in the creation of ideas. Ideas which will result in works that will take place across the entire physical geography of the 4 nations of the UK, as well as online, through broadcast, in print, basically every conceivable way that exists which enables ideas to be imparted, and some ways yet to be invented. The UK already is a global powerhouse of green innovation, of creative industries and new technologies. But we must invest in creatives across sectors in order for that status to evolve to meet the ever-shifting demands of the 21st century in a post-industrial, post-pandemic, digital-led society. It's clear that almost any analysis of employment trends show that as we face the 4th industrial revolution of data, AI and automation, and as we look to hopefully rebalancing our economy and building back sustainably, jobs where creativity is a key skill is predicted to rise by up to 40%. In the battle of human creativity versus algorithms, the human mind is still, for the time, coming out on top. It is time to reflect on the value we place on both creativity and the creative as something core to our socio-economic survival. The festival will be wildly ambitious, a UK-wide mass participation project delivered in partnership by all 4 governments of the UK that celebrates cross-sector collaboration and creativity through the presentation of 10 experiments in creativity, 10 awe-inspiring examples of creative ambition, visions of a future realised, each individually reaching millions, but together creating a catalyst for a much wider critical societal conversation. Festival UK 2022 views that the creativity contained in the minds of the individuals who share these islands as collectively our greatest asset. And we will seek to help unleash this through defining the project as a movement for creative ambition, the life-changing potential of which illustrates in the most inspiring way possible through the 10 experiments of the public programme, galvanising communities across the UK by demonstrating what can be possible when creatives are given the time, the resource and support to think big, and given the multiple existential crises we find ourselves in, and doubtless many more still to come, perhaps inspiring a sense of optimism within our shared futures. So I'll quickly just give you a bit of a rundown about how we got to where we are before we start the panel. So the festival has two KPIs, key performance indicators, objectives, which is kind of unique and kind of a blank sheet of paper in terms of a major UK-wide festival creativity, which is backed by £120 million of new investment from the UK government. And this is including funding to Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, devolved administrations. So bringing people together and celebrating our offer to the world. We firmly believe if you do the first one, the second one happens. Within the 30 teams, which were part of the R&D, the creative brief, which was imagining designing large-scale optic, which will engage millions, was put to them as a provocation, and the results have been absolutely astounding. It's important to understand that this doesn't exist in a vacuum. This is part of a much wider year, I suppose. There's a lot of things happening in 2022, from the Platinum Jubilee to the 100 years of the BBC to 40 years of S4C, Coventry City of Culture still continuing, a new project at the Royal Albert Hall, the Great Exhibition 2.0. There's so many different things. So what is the role of festival within that programme? As I mentioned, the sort of core idea of festival is to celebrate the role of creativity and the creative, and we're going to do that through the presentation of these 10 experiments in creativity. The R&D programme, which we've just been through, was genuinely a cross-sector celebration of all things of imagination. It was, the individuals involved have been astounding, and as you see from the figures, it was so cross, it's from 27 universities, 31 technology and digital organisations, 32 scientists and research institutes. This is genuinely STEAM and meeting of minds, which was absolutely what we hoped for. And it's certainly what we achieved. So what I'm going to do, this is a bit of an insight. So we've been through the process, and this is the current heat map of where activity is scheduled to take place through 2022. And we're working on the premise that we could get to about 90 to 95% of the UK population will be no more than 40 minutes on public transport away from a project, which I think is really important when we're talking about the future of arts and culture, that it's not just a digital future, that these things have physical iterations, that the congregation of human beings is a critical thing. And then physical, and then how do we inspire this next generation of UK creativity? And that's going to become, I think, the basis of our conversation now. It's also important to point out that the R&D process was conducted under a Creative Commons approach to intellectual property, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But that meaning that all of the work undertaken by the 30 or so, 500 individuals, 30 teams, was all sort of undertaken with this spirit of intellectual generosity, where all of the research, all of the ideas are now, I suppose, this amazing archive, which is a sort of a snapshot of cross-sector collaboration in this part of the 21st century, this part sort of an encapsulation of the creative ambition of our creatives of the UK. So I'll just show you a quick film, which is an overview of the Creative Studio, and then we'll go straight into the panel.
Our festivals subvert.
Oh no, right.
Multidisciplinary.
Is a festival still a festival if there are no big glass buildings?
You need to collaborate.
If you make yourself feel deeply uncomfortable in this process, that's an indication you're getting somewhere. Have the power to disarm our fears.
Creative enough for everyone to shine.
For new and bold and brave work.
Give yourself this moment to dream.
A year full of surprises, of joy, of intrigue, of laughter, and the sounds of jaws dropping.
It's our responsibility to imagine something that we can aim for.
We've all got to think big.
We wind up becoming the future.
Let grand ideas shimmer into existence.
Makes the UK look absolutely sick and bang.
We have more in common than sometimes we think.
Working together, we can definitely succeed.
Led by people really sensitive, right, in the sense of all the programs.
we will ensure that our future doesn't look like our past.
See, you can achieve the impossible.
Great. Okay. So, well, it gives me great pleasure to bring in the panel of the three individuals who have been critical over the last year of helping get us to where we are, and three of the most biggest brains I've ever had the pleasure of working with. So I'd love to firstly introduce Wanda Abizia, and I love this description of your work, and I think it absolutely perfectly encapsulates it. So a constellation point for a spectrum of multidisciplinary work that calls for radical change. More not just in multidisciplinary artists, there's something, and you were a creative advisor to the research and development. And Elle Ossili-Wood, who's an award-winning television presenter and journalist specialising in arts, entertainment and gaming, as well as leading on many of the interviews as part of the creative process. She was also a creative advisor and an independent assessor for all of the pitches. And Pat Kane, who is a writer, musician, curator, consultant, activist and futurist, and he was a consultant to the research and development phase and has been involved with this for well over a year now, haven't you? I remember us first meeting in in a bustling Soho last year over pizza. Indeed. To try and plan something. Anyway, but it's a real pleasure to have you all here, and it'd be great to get your reflections on things. So I'll kick off. I mean, as you know, this project is always and always has been in a state of development. Martin Green, our Chief Creative Officer, was very keen at the outset not to define what it should be and create, I suppose, a set of circumstances whereby the creatives of the UK would tell us what the project is. This makes conversations like this so important. So the opportunity is always to shape things, like it's always live to shape this project. I suppose I'm interested in this conversation being about identifying your personal takes on the potential for positive change contained in this project. So first off, I suppose, it'd be good to get your reflections on the process so far. Each of you were involved in different aspects of the R&D. In Elle's case, have seen all of the ideas come out of it, but you have seen the 10. What do you think worked in the R&D? What lessons do you think can be learned from this process as a way of making work? Can we start off with Elle?
So for me, I think the thing that was very exciting about this was the idea of asking for applications for a process that results in a huge idea, that results in this, massive scale public event, but without asking people to come to you with that idea. And I think, having been there right at the beginning, having, gone through the applications as a creative advisor, it's very clear that that's something we struggle with. I think most kind of R&D processes, most grants in the UK require you to come with not just an idea, but an incredibly well-defined idea. You need budgets, you need audiences, you need, all the planning done for it. And so for me, what was exciting was seeing people trying to shed those preconceived ideas of what they would want to do with this project, because everybody has an opinion about Festival UK 2022. Everybody had a thought about what they imagine it looking like, what they imagine it being, and so it was very interesting to see how the different groups approached a process that was designed around them genuinely coming together and building this idea in the R&D process, not coming to you with an idea. People had themes, people had, perhaps audiences they wanted to reach that were underserved and they thought they could, reach out to through this project. But for me, watching people actually have to develop it as part of this really unique R&D process that brought them together in a creative studio is something I think we actually don't do enough in any of the industries that, any of the sectors that we've worked within: science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and the arts. And so I would love to see more of that. For me, that's been a huge takeaway, is actually there's something in the development of the idea as part of the process, and not having people come with big ideas, because I often think that that's very exclusionary. Not everybody comes from a culturally literate background. Not everybody knows what it is to set up a festival or a huge public scale event. And so there's something about that participation that I think is revolutionary.
Wando, what I loved about your contribution to the creative studio was taking 300 or so individuals on a meditation, but it was much more than that. And how I suppose using that as a starting off point, how you feel the artistic or the creative advisors were able to inspire or provoke different ways of working.
Well, I think it was, yeah, I mean, it was just a great provocation that you gave to us, the creative advisors, to each do what we do to inspire other people. I think that's one thing that I really liked about it, that I think when you first spoke to me about my contribution, I was like, oh, I don't want to do a presentation. And you were like, well, I don't know, you don't have to, you can do whatever you want. And so I guess what I really wanted to do was create a moment that people could go on a journey, and giving them something that they hadn't had in their lives for, you know, for the last, what was it then, about 9 months, because we've all been alone in our homes. So yeah, giving them like a shared experience, whilst understanding that for everyone it was a solo experience. And then the really important thing for me was a moment to all see each other's faces at the end. So yeah.
It's interesting, because building on that, because the question is, what can we learn from this as a model for creation? But this model will never possibly be replicated if, fingers crossed, we start to move out of the pandemic and into some semblance of a new normality or whatever. So this idea of this creation across so many individuals, from their spare bedrooms, from their living rooms, there was a sort of a unique moment in time in that, I suppose. And Pat, do you think that sort of, well, it certainly impacted the approach, but what's the good things that can come out of that in terms of the ideation?
I think the goodest thing to come out of it would be that we know how to sustainably do profound and rich creative process at quite a scale now. I mean, that's some of my pet theories about play and innovation were proved by the creative studio process and by the final 10. I mean, and I've got a big theory about play. I wrote a book called The Play Ethic. So creativity is often what adults do, and play is what children do, but it's the same thing. And all the scholarship on play was telling me, and we had many conversations about this, Sam, is that play stroke creativity is like this calibration between risk and security. You know, when you play, you're free to play. You know, when play is indicated in the wild or in a refugee camp, when the children are playing, you know that things are moving beyond scarcity and urgency and moving into a space of freedom. And so the question is, it's not just how do you create the playgrounds, how do you create a ground of play? How do you create that secure structure? How do you design it well enough, like a designed playground is designed, so that the people who play on the equipment are free to fail, free to take risks, free to jump across disciplinary boundaries. And that's what we consciously built when we built the creative studio, and that's the kind of culture that we consciously try to inculcate in the process. And I mean, and the final spur to that would have been the STEAM framework, the cross-disciplinary framework across sciences and humanities. Because in order for that to even work, in order for a coder to sit down with a choreographer, to sit down with a games maker, to sit down with a poet, to sit down with a land activist, there has to be A, trust, and then B, there has to be creative processes that allow concepts to jump from realm to realm, from practice to practice, and come up with new fusions. And that's what the history of innovation tells us, right? If you look at the coffee roll, the coffee houses in the Edinburgh environment of the 18th century, or you look at the hangouts in Boston or Palo Alto around about the corporate areas, you know, it's where people go to bars and shoot the shit, is when the genuine ideas really happen. So, and then we tried to create that online in the midst of a pandemic. So the challenges were definitely there. But I think it's really proved to me that there's a way to there's an institution that you can design that generates maximum creativity, and I would love that lesson to start to percolate in the way that we think it we talk about it percolating, you know, when we talk about the Google 20% rule, or when we talk about the MIT Media Lab, and it sort of percolates, trickles down from the top. I'd love it to be trickling up from the bottom, and I'd love this to be a spur for us to think about how we create culture and institutions of genuine mass creativity, because really creativity is the extra natural resource that's going to get us through the next 20, 30, 40 years. And I would love Festival UK 2022 to be the kickstart for that. And I think it could be.
It's so difficult at this stage in the process not to. Well, I feel sometimes like a snake oil salesman saying like, this is going to be mind blowing, this will be. But we've seen the projects, we know what's come out of this, and we know the potential that's within them. And I'm so sorry for the audience who are unable to tell you more, but there is genuinely something there. And since we spoke last week, Pat, actually, I've been thinking a lot about imagination and the power of this project to be that catalyst, that spur for imagination, the potential of the project to sort of light a fire, if that's the right word, in the imagination of the audience, or, you know, if audience is the right word, particularly in young people, and particularly in this generation that's been absolutely the hardest hit over the last year. With this in mind, I mean, you talk a bit about those, you know, the formative moments that set you on a particular course in your life, that you've been, you know, you see something which blows your mind, and you then go off onto something. I mean, these are normally like products of synergy, of like stars aligning, of like moments. Like, is it possible for these moments to be willfully manufactured by government investment in the creation of work?
Well, if the government behaves to the people and to the citizenry in the same generous and supportive way as they responded to the 30 participating teams in this process. I mean, just to throw a match in the gasoline, they all had a universal basic income, right? i.e., they were all given a certain amount of money to properly develop what they were doing, and they were all encouraged, and they were given a platform, a generous platform, to connect between themselves, which we called the Creative Studio. So I mean, I sort of can see this reverberating into the future, but without a doubt, you know, to spend money on inspiring spectacle that are also participative, and again, it's not giving too much away from the processes, but there's a lot of participation in these massive spectacles that are going to happen. It would be a damn shame if the consequence of that wasn't, we now have a method for collective joy. Let's develop it. And then let's think about the conditions under which it would be developed. And that might be as much to do with housing and welfare and education grants as it is to do with funding the Royal College of Art, or creating a new art gallery, or funding the existing creative sector. The grounds of play, I think, are there ready to be developed. And I think the scale of 2022, the fact that it goes right across all the islands, the fact that it goes across the disciplines, and also, frankly, that we brought consciously, subconsciously, people who were not part of the charm circle of creative processes into dialogue with major artistic institutions. It's a properly inclusive process, 2022. If there's not kind of collective lessons learned from that, I think it would be a shame and probably a waste of the money. But if there are collective lessons learned, I think we are set up for a kind of shift in the common sense of the culture towards not the work ethic, maybe the creative ethic, maybe the play ethic, whatever you want to call it. But I think that's the possibility of it, is a shift in the common sense of what it is to be a purposeful, lively, contributing person. How about creativity as the edge on that, rather than just duteous work?
Building on that, Wando, I mean, the creation of this process, it's been a really interesting, is one word, journey, I suppose. Using the program, usually like the programming of a festival, is to serve like the often but unsaid values or sort of curatorial frameworks that festival has, you know, already exists. But with Festival UK, we're absolutely starting from scratch. The R&D process was designed to establish those values, and then hopefully through direction or osmosis see those values reflected in the program. Mind you, but this something as vast as this is always open to interpretation. And with that in mind, what do you think UK Festival 2022 is for, or should stand for?
I think I mean, the main thing that drew me to it and was so clear during the R&D process was the interdisciplinary nature of it. I remember during it, there was the interviews I was really excited about, you know, Nile Rodgers, oh my God, that's gonna be amazing to feel like I'm in the room with him, and Ellie's asking him questions, and you know, and he did drop the pearls about talking about working with David Bowie and how he suggested changing a song. You know, this is the amazing stuff. But then there was the people who I hadn't seen speaking before, like Maggie Pocock, talking about how, you know, how she became interested in space was through watching the Clangers as a child, and that's like, I love that that's not like a ridiculous statement. It's like really real. You can see the passion in her while she was talking about the Clangers. I don't know, in case you don't know, little space mice. So yeah, it was that not knowing what was going to come next and not knowing what's going to leave a massive impact. What's going to create a sense of wonder, even if you don't know much about science or much about history. When David Olusoga, yeah, when he talked about the history of British festivals, just, yeah, amazing, thinking about the politics of all these festivals and what's possible. So it's that it's the surprise, the element of surprise, I think, that came through in the R&D that I hope is something that comes out in the eventual project. And I'm just it's just so natural for me to be interdisciplinary, and I noticed that when one of my roles was to talk to people in my communities of art, disabled art, people in like disability arts, Black people, I really wanted to get them involved and get them applying. And what I kept on hearing was, I don't know a scientist, how can I apply? I don't know somebody in engineering. And I was like, yeah, I know, sometimes I don't, and I just contact them and say, hey, do you want to make this installation? And I think I'd love it if that was more normalized, and hopefully that was something I saw in the R&D happening. There was this amazing thing that you did, these kind of like speed dating rooms. They weren't called speed dating. They were called something.
But they were speed dating.
But they were speed dating. And so it was the most clear instance I've ever experienced of that, where you're suddenly in a room with 5 people, and one's an engineer and one's a scientist and one's a dancer, and you all just get to talk for a little bit, and the things that were coming out. And I think just the excitement and the idea that, oh, we can be in this room and we've got so much that's instantly easy to connect on. That's that kind of experience, I hope, goes more into the culture of how we think and make and create processes and projects.
Elle, it'd be great to get your take on what you think Festival UK 2022 does or should stand for.
For me, I think participation is so key. You know, and there's so many ways to kind of look at that word, and as we say, we can't really talk about the projects, but many of them are, you know, mass participation. I think all of them had, you know, an element of the public feeling as though they are participating in something bigger than themselves. And I think that is a thread that started at the beginning of this process, when, you know, we had quite onerous requirements for teams. You know, there were lots and lots of elements around the sectors you must represent in your team. You know, people must not know each other. You know, you must be reaching out and finding voices you haven't worked with before. You must be finding underrepresented voices, you know, perspectives that were lacking in the various sectors we were looking within. And so it's this idea of collaboration, of participation, of building something bigger than yourself. And that's for me been something that's been incredibly exciting to watch, particularly, you know, from the very beginning stages where people were submitting applications with the first, you know, tentacles of their idea. And they were very much, I felt very disparate, many of them. You know, it was, well, I'm the arts person, this is what I'll be doing. I'm the science person, you know, I'll be facilitating this element of a platform or an event or a festival. And as the process you know, as we moved through the R&D process, as people attended the creative studio and heard from voices offering, you know, perspectives perhaps they hadn't considered from these different sectors, as they worked with people they'd never imagined they would work with, we started to see projects that could only exist at the intersection of these sectors, that were transformative, that, you know, became much bigger than the sum of their parts. And I thought that that was absolutely fascinating, to see people start to develop ways to work together that, you know, relied on each other, so that every sector was integral. You know, this idea could not exist without one of them. None of them are there just to prop up another, or to, you know, they haven't included technology in as much as somebody's doing a great light show and that's the tech bit. You know, the ideas were truly, you know, there was a genesis of something completely new and transformative. That, you know, the transformative power of genuine participation and collaboration is what's been so exciting to me. And so that's what I have really felt in particularly the 30 projects that we took to that final stage, is people who truly understand what it is to bring together different voices and create something that could never have existed without every single one of them. And so I'm hugely excited for Festival UK to bring that to the wider public, to bring that to an audience, to make people feel connected to these sectors, because many of these projects had a large focus on reaching underserved communities, whether that's culturally, whether that's, you know, in a kind of technological sense. And so I'm really excited for people who never thought they were part of the arts world, never thought they were interested in science, hated maths at school, to come to these projects and feel like they are an essential part of this piece, that it exists because they are there, because they are part of it. And, you know, I think that we will see the impact of this for decades to come. You know, for me, during this project, I have referenced the Millennium Dome a lot, because I genuinely think that for me, that was a really transformative part of my childhood. And I genuinely love it. I will fight anybody on this front. And so I hope that Festival UK does what we wanted the Millennium Dome to do, you know, be this inspiring moment that in, you know, decades from now, people look back and they say, when I was 12, when I was 21, when I was, you know, 35, whatever, I went to this incredible event, festival, piece, whatever, and it completely changed my mind about something. It completely opened up a new path for me, and it made me feel part of something, and that I could be part of something, and that it could change because I was. And that's what I'm, you know, incredibly excited to see. And I have no doubt that's what we're going to see.
Just to give people watching this a sort of an insight into the scale of ambition, one of the teams that is going through the contracting phase at the moment proposed the largest ever schools engagement programme ever undertaken, 10,000 schools, 7.5 million children. That's one of the 10. So there's such ambition underpinning all of this. Pat, same question to you. What are your hopes for this, coming from your very particular point of view?
Well, I mean, one of the sobriquets you gave me at the beginning was futurist, and certainly a lot of futurists are good at evoking large, grand-scale challenges. You know, and the usual. There's a sort of there's two, and then there's sort of three coming along. There's two. The one obvious one is climate crisis, Anthropocene. Second one is kind of automation. You know, the balance between the human and the mechanical, and maybe the third is as a consequence of the first two. A planet on the move, you know, boundaries becoming challenged because of the movement of peoples and because of moving away from climate crisis or moving towards different things. So those are the three challenges and crises. And they often appear on opinion editorials in newspapers. They might appear in documentaries on Netflix. They might be sort of invoked in the general chatter. Very rarely does this stuff come down to where people are and where they live. And very rarely do people think about how they translate that into experience on the street corner, in the public square, in the supermarket. And Sam, you came to me from Hull, the Hull City of Culture experiment, which I think was a great example of how to take a place not generally regarded as a cultural place and throw it forward into the future, throw it back into the past, unearth parts of its present. So that's what I hope Festival 2022 does, is I hope that it brings in a very everyday level some scripts, some ideals, some practices, and some absolutely mind-blowing experiences that aren't just passive spectacle, that actually are triggers for a whole new culture, a movement of creativity. I think that's a very adequate way to describe it, that will trigger a movement of creativity and a kind of ask for forgiveness, not permission mentality at the heart of society. And I mean, and just for example, at the heart of how we learn and what we regard as knowledges that are legitimate for us to pursue or not to pursue. And I think, again, that can come down, that can be talked about in a top-down way. Here's the new policy, here's the new framework, here's the new renamed department. So much better that it comes from bottom up. That in the way that Cedric Price and John Littlewood talked about fun palaces at the end of the 60s, or the way that Archigram imagined cities with legs on the move. You know, the challenges are so big that our imagination needs to be big, if not bigger, to respond to them, but to respond to them joyfully rather than grimly, to respond to them by building things and by blowing people's minds rather than by wailing and rending our garments, is a choice. And Festival 22 has made that choice. And I hope that that choice inspires other people to make the same choice for joy rather than complaint in a whole other range of sets of other areas. Because in any case, because you solve the problems, but you enjoy solving the problems, win-win.
Well, that's interesting, the joy rather than complaint. And I suppose it's impossible to have a conversation like this without acknowledging the noise around this project, you know,
of course,
and the controversy and where this project came from. And, you know, it's very public record that this £120 million was made available because we are leaving the European Union. And now Festival 2022 is something very different than what I think was announced a number of years ago. You know, independent board working across the 4 governments of the UK, which I think is a very clear statement of intent about where we are philosophically. But how do you feel we move the story on? We move away from that noise. Wanda?
Oh, how do we move the story on?
I'm
going to type that down. I don't know. It's a really hard one. I think the way that we do it is the way that you all started to do it. It was, you know, number one was understanding, okay, what are the problems we're facing, and what are the right and ethical ways of doing this. Number one, having people involved from the project's inception, having, like, I remember the first time we were in the creative advisors meeting, and it's the most diverse team ethnically I've ever worked with. It was, you know, and obviously diverse across disciplines. There was always an insistence in having marginalized people in the room, so having disabled people there, having neurodiverse people there, you know, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, and having all these people represented. So I think one way we move the story on of, you know, the stories, that the issues that are around Brexit, of racism, of xenophobia, of taking ourselves away from the world, is by having people in who don't want to do any of those things. I mean, I'm obviously not a Brexiteer. I don't think anybody else. I don't know, I guess I should only speak for myself, but, you know, it's I'm really close with lots of people who are really anti the Festival of Brexit, and I tell them, well, I'm not in the Festival of Brexit, so that's fine. And, you know, there's lots of concerns and lots of ethical concerns. So it's by being ethically minded. Again, the project was, for me, just like worked in so many ways that, like, the best practice that I've ever been involved in. Like I was saying, like paying people to do the R&D, paying, you know, at this time when so many freelancers have lost their jobs, have no income, the opportunity to come and think and dream for a few months. For me, I was telling people, just come and do that just because of that. You know, for me, I've seen this project as being something that goes over a longer period than like an event, which is I think another issue of thinking about this Festival of Brexit, like, oh, is it going to be one night and a concert where Oasis play or something? And it's like, no, it's a time for us all to come together and sort things out creatively and with hope and with all the resources that we have, which is our dreamers and our thinkers and our believers. So I think, yeah, it's about it's doing what the festival's done. It's always keeping the ideas being ideas about problem solving, I guess, not just purely about celebrating. I think that was something a lot of people have been fearful of. Oh, it's going to be about like celebrating rule Britannia, and that's absolutely not been the case. It's been about questioning and looking at all of the projects, all of the 10 projects. I'm not going to give anything away. But they're all answering specific massive problems that we're facing at the moment. They're all, around sustainability. They're looking towards the skies. They're looking inwards towards the brain. And so I feel like we're moving the story on. I think as long as we keep on holding true to those ideals of being ethical, of problem solving, of being diverse, of challenging racism, of challenging sexism, of challenging the idea that we all have to be in our little boxes and not go out of them. I think that's how we do it.
Elle, you have a very public-facing role in your day-to-day business, so you can sort of see this in a sort of, I suppose, from a different side. Sort of same question to you in terms of using your sort of PR brain around this, like that shift of telling the story of how this came from somewhere and then turning it into something else. How can that be facilitated?
For me, I think one of the issues is that, of course, the narrative of this project, of this story, of what it's trying to achieve, that narrative was lost early on. And I think that's a problem actually, that we're facing globally. It's a problem we're facing across every industry, is that there are certain people who, certain groups that are very good at taking control of a narrative and presenting it in a way that is entirely untrue, that is, not at all based on reality or facts, and allowing it to spread. And unfortunately, often in those scenarios, the truth is a lot more boring, or it's not as interesting, or it doesn't have a catchy hook like Brexit Festival. And so, it doesn't catch. And I think for me, perhaps the issue was not being, aggressively transparent about this whole process, because we've shared teams, we've had really great blog posts. I love that kind of work where we've had people reflect on the process. But I think actually, we're almost at warfare with untruth and careful presentations of things to suit narratives and certain audiences. And perhaps what we should have been doing, I think, from a kind of from the very beginning, is really going out there on a PR offensive and placing stories, reaching out to have people share the kind of transformative experience they've gone through as part of the R&D process, really having people talk about their role as creative advisors. Because as Rando said, for me, that has been absolutely one of the most diverse groups I've ever been part of in so many different ways, visible and not, every aspect of diversity, of interesting perspectives, of voices that we don't get to hear, perspectives we never see, is part of that group. And I think that alone is what convinced me to join this project, was hearing the effort to make sure that this project not only brought in people in terms of the R&D process, not only brought in teams that reflected the world we live in and the voices we don't get to hear, but that the people behind the scenes, the people who would be judging the applications, who would be shaping that R&D process, that they also represented those voices, that they also had not, that we had not worked together, many of us, it was a really exciting group, I think, to be part of. And so for me, people don't know about those elements, we didn't, nothing, I'm going to call it the right side, nothing on the right side of the truth is ever loud enough at the moment, and I think that actually, and this is a problem everybody has, we have to start being really aggressive about making sure that narrative comes through. And for me, luckily, that's something that I think these projects will do a lot of themselves. That the work is incredibly exciting. It clearly does not serve any narrative around Brexit, any narrative around that rule Britannia. I think that was the perfect way to put it. You know, it's nobody could look at the work that has come out of this, the teams that have been assembled, the beautiful, joyful ideas and creativity that's inspired, and think that it is anything to do with the story that we have heard throughout this process in the press, that we have heard on social media. But I do think it is up to us to far more aggressively make sure that story is heard, to aggressively counter when this festival is called a Brexit festival, because that has never been the case. There is a common misconception that it was the Brexit festival and now is not, when of course it never was. This was a throwaway comment by Jacob Rees-Mogg. That has never been the purpose of it. And then so it's, I think, getting that story out there, making it clear that has never existed. You are upset about a phantom festival that was, you know, never set up, never planned, no money for it. This is something entirely different. And I think, you know, as these projects are announced, this is the perfect point to really reach out to you know, arts publications, to reach out to, you know, industries as well. For me, I come from games. Much of the work I do is within the games industry, and you know, I always think games is a really perfect example of what we were trying to achieve here, because it involves so many different disciplines working together to create, you know, something incredible at the end of it. And it is essentially STEAM in a nutshell. And so, you know, there are lots of industries who have been trying to do or have been doing what we have tried to do here, that would love to hear these stories, who would love to celebrate these stories, who would love to hear about how you facilitated something so incredible in such a short period of time in such difficult circumstances. There are so many brilliant lessons here that we can share. There are so many just, you know, beautiful stories. Some of the stories that we've heard about the connections that have been made during this, they would make great articles, they would make great podcasts, they would, you know, there are so many wonderful stories here. And I think that, you know, we haven't been transparent enough about them. We haven't been, I'm going to say aggressively transparent again, this is my phrase, you know, really getting this true story of what this has been and what an incredible transformative experience this has been, and you know, the impact we hope for it to have, really pushing that narrative out there and aggressively countering anything that, you know, is an untruth, is a misconception. Because for me, the impact of this is so reliant on us moving past this Brexit festival issue. You know, I like I said, I want this to be something that lives on for decades, and we're going to always struggle to do that whilst people refuse to participate, you know, are pushed back by this idea of something, you know, that is horrifying to them, that is, you know, destroying the communities that we're trying to reach. So yeah, for me, we need to be a lot more aggressive about it, is essentially my PR brain thinking.
Brilliant, great bit of consultancy, thank you.
I'll send you my invoice.
I know, yeah.
So we've got a few minutes left, and we're back to I suppose what you're discussing there is we need to stand for something and have these core set of principles which are public and a little bit more defined than open, original, optimistic, or just really defining what we mean by that. So as I said in the introduction, like how these 10 experiments in creativity, these 10 examples of cross-sector creative ambition, how can they act as a catalyst to this wider conversation around the role of creativity in society? This reappraisal as to the core role creativity and the creative can and must play. How this project can be the beginning of a movement for creative ambition. So something that was kick-started by the 14 creative advisors and those very early conversations, and then on to the 500 or so creative cross-sector creatives, through what's going to be the largest engagement program ever undertaken, and onto the 10 examples of what can be possible when creatives are supported to think big. So knowing what you do, what do you want to see happen because of Festival UK 2022 in terms of legacy, but what are the risks we're facing in order to sort of realise this ambition, Pat?
Slightly an answer to your previous question and an answer to this one. I remember one of the first conversations I had with you and Martin when the Brexit question came up, and I remember my answer being something like, take back control is a profoundly philosophical call. I've been involved in 2 acts of self-determination. One was all the artists and creatives that were on the yes side in the independence referendum in 2014. And then in Brexit, I was on the other side. I wanted to remain. So I have an experience of the power of the call to self-determination. And self-determination is actually a psychological theory, and it says there's three components to it: meaning, mastery, and autonomy. Meaning, mastery, and autonomy. And I mean, if there's three things that this festival is doing for people, I hope that it does for people, is that it gives them meaning, it gives them a sense of new mastery. I have the right to express myself this way, or join up these knowledges this way, or to experiment publicly in this way. And autonomy, I am free and supported to be the fullest I can be. So I think there is a continuity between the cries for self-determination that went out, that have been going out across the world actually, but you can go from the Arab Spring all the way up to the present. But I think that there are beautiful and profound and cultural ways in which people can self-determine themselves, can take control of their lives. And I hope we're part of that. I think that's part of a great sweep in the right direction. And I hope that's what Festival 2022 can contribute to.
Wando, what are your fears? What do you think will stop us from doing what we all want to do?
Yeah, I was really interested in what Elle was saying. I think one of the things I noticed when I was trying to get people involved, who I thought should be involved in the project, was social media. It's this messaging thing again, the power of peer pressure, and especially at a time when everyone's sitting at home and the only connection with the world was social media, the power of that to change people's minds. So I know that there was lots of secret kind of people who wanted to be involved, or maybe even were involved and then dropped out because of the peer pressure, especially when you're in the arts and your colleagues are also your friends and also quite often your employers. So I think I'm kind of just repeating what Ella's saying, is that if we can't infiltrate that, if there can't be some entryism, if there can't be some some sharing of the massive impact that it's already had on lots of people's lives, then the right people are not going to be involved. People are going to be put off, and people aren't going to get to experience it and participate in it. And because it is the biggest mass participation event ever, if people aren't participating, then it isn't held up by that groundswell of people. So I think that's the thing I'm most afraid of. Also, because I think, I mean, the very point of it is something I have a really strong belief of, which is that when you get diversity of people all involved in things, that's how you create the best solutions. You know, whether that's ethnically diverse or neurodiverse, that's what you need. And so if there's going to be whole swathes of that spectrum just cut off, then it's almost like the actual thing won't happen. So yeah, that's my fear.
And I think that was very apparent in the ideas submitted around that, when the teams were coming from those particular very different points of view and the teams that were more representative, you saw that creative ambition sort of in a much more resonant way. Elle, quickly, your fears.
I guess my fears are very similar. You know, lots of them have been touched on, so I won't reiterate. But for me, I think we asked for something truly extraordinary. We asked for something innovative and life-changing. We asked for work we've never seen before, that could never have been created before without this project, without this process. And that requires faith and trust and vulnerability. It requires you being a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit confused. And I worry that, you know, as has been said, we don't have the goodwill for people to truly commit to give themselves to this process and what they could get from it as a participant. So for me, you know, for this to have the incredible, you know, truly monumental impact that I believe it could, in terms of creating a repository of creative work to look back on, in terms of, you know, teaching people about STEM, about arts, about the power of their voice and their role in these sectors, you know, I worry that we won't be able to convince people to trust us, to have faith in that, to turn up and do something a little bit bonkers, a little bit weird, a little bit, you know, strange and out of their comfort zone. And I just hope that we do, because I truly believe that this project will change lives.
On that, we'll leave it. Thank you very, very much, El, Pat, Wando. It's been a pleasure working with you on that. I thought that was a great conversation. Thank you, everyone, and thanks to British House and Arts Council and British Underground. Thank you very much. All right.
Goodbye.